As abstract expressionist painting moves on into the late 1950s and into the 1960s, we see a new movement develop within abstract expressionism that comes to be called color field painting. Mark Rothko is the artist who was most successful and well known among the color field artists. So, this example by Mark Rothko shows you what was most important for the artists of color field painting. As the name of the movement would suggest, it's all about fields of color. So the areas of color that you see in color field painting are broad. The scale of the painting is important to recognize. These paintings are large. They're not meant to be experienced as pictures of something. They're made to be experienced as something that's going to fill our visual field. And that becomes a problem for color field artists to want to promote themselves in magazines, incidentally, because they believe that a painting needs to be treated as a painting, and scale is essential to a painting. So they felt really awkward about their artworks being shown in magazines because that makes it just like a picture, and it doesn't really do it justice. Well, keep that in mind when you're looking at these paintings on the screen. If you see them in person, the goal is to stand close enough to the painting that it really just fills your visual field. So the artists of color field painting want you to react intuitively to these areas of color as they sort of fill your scope of vision. For Mark Rothko, when we're standing in front of one of his paintings, he's sort of imagining how we're going to relate to an area of color that's higher, that's closer to our face, an area of color that's closer to our torso, an area that's closer to our feet and close to the ground. So he's not trying to create a landscape with these paintings, and he's not trying to create a figure with them. He's trying to create sort of zones of color that we're going to intuitively react to in different ways. You'll notice that he doesn't title his paintings the way that other people would title his paintings, because he doesn't want these paintings to be taken as stories or as symbols. He wants us to react to the colors. Now, about reacting to the colors, he has feelings about color that are not entirely unlike Kandinsky's. He believes that yellow is a sort of an uplifting, celebratory color. That red has more to do with the insides, with passion, with what we associate with red, blood and energy and intensity. Different emotions correspond to different colors, but he doesn't wish to just like give us a glossary or guide of the colors. Rather, he wants us to experience the energy of the colors on our own. Mark Rothko was a master of his materials. The way that he worked the colors onto the canvas was by thinning down his oil paints to such a degree that they're going to soak into the canvas, but only so much. And he's very conscious of the edges of the painted areas and the way that they relate to each other. Here's a close-up of the image that you just saw a minute ago. So look at where the reds touch each other in the sort of darkened zone that's in between them. That's because of layers of underpainting and very careful planning of the different reds that he uses. They're very subtle, and they really need to be experienced in person. But when you do experience them in person, the colors really seem to come to life. Have a look at what he does with the colors in this painting. Okay, so there's a underpainting of this sort of light lavender color that undergoes all of the colors, and then he paints this magenta field that you see towards the top area. There's a sort of feathering of it and layering of it, so that you get this sort of blur zone towards the top, and then some sort of distinct edges in other places where it's more blurry. Where the magenta and the black are almost meeting, there's a little strip of space in between them where you see just a little bit of terracotta edging that comes out from some parts of the black area. And you see a whole lot more of that terracotta edging underneath at the bottom of the painting. So that shows you how he's layering the colors. When people talk about Mark Rothko's paintings, they tend to talk about how some colors advance and other colors recede, and the colors tend to interact with each other. The language that we use to describe it communicates some of how these paint colors and textures seem to come alive, and that's the mastery of Mark Rothko in working with his materials. This black zone that he's got in this painting doesn't feel like empty space. It doesn't feel like a background. It feels like a mass of space, a mass of a plane of color that is its own entity and not an absence. This brings us to the Rothko Chapel. So Mark Rothko in the mid-1960s was commissioned to make a series of paintings that were going to be experienced in the round. And he collaborated through his patrons with the architect Philip Johnson to design this space that was specifically for these paintings. There were a number of complications. It took several years for this structure to be completed, and Rothko didn't survive to see this commission completed. But the paintings that he made are they don't really make sense if you're just looking at them as a picture like this, but they're made to be experienced in person, because the blacks of these paintings have a subtle texture to them and very subtle lights and darks to the blacks that are just at the edge of visual perception, that you can barely perceive them. So you have to be still, you have to be quiet, and you have to calm yourself and just be there looking at these paintings for a certain amount of time before you're even able to literally see what is there. So this is a space that was made for meditation and contemplation, and that's what the paintings are about. This brings us to the aesthetic of the sublime, which you'll remember from Romantic painting in the early 19th century. In the aesthetic of the sublime, we see the individual confronting the vast, unmanageable forces of nature that make the individual feel small. Well, with this kind of approach to abstract painting that relies on the aesthetic of the sublime, our response to the painting as a viewer is like the response of this little monk by the sea. We come to the limits of our own perception and ideally of our own understanding. When these paintings work, and what they aim to do, what these paintings aspire to do, is to bring us to this kind of an experience of the sublime. This was one of Mark Rothko's last paintings. It's from 1969. Mark Rothko suffered from depression and alcoholism, and he died by suicide not long after completing this painting. So remember how the black of the paintings in the Rothko Chapel have these subtle qualities to them that reward contemplation. And earlier, the areas of black that he had in his color field paintings had a life of their own. Here you see the opposite. Okay, here you can see these browns that look just like mud, and they go all the way off the edges of the canvas. And the black in the upper area of the canvas is a void. No longer is it something that moves towards us. It's something that is just absence. Just on a personal level, that painting always reminded me of that view of the depths of space from the moon that you got from these photographs that came from the moon missions at the time.